A bear rescues a baby from a car crash. Take it to forest. What happens next is unbelievable. The wind howled through the rugged peaks of Jackson, Wyoming, as dark clouds rolled over the sky, casting ominous shadows across the winding mountain road. The air was sharp and cold, the scent of impending snow heavy on the breeze. In the Collins family's SUV, warmth cocooned them from the bitter chill outside. Soft music hummed from the speakers, mingling with the playful giggles of 2-year-old Noah, who sat snugly strapped in his car seat, his chubby fingers clutching a stuffed bear whose worn fur had long since faded from countless hugs. Sarah Collins glanced back at her son, her heart swelling at the sight of his curly brown hair and bright blue eyes. The mirror image of her husband Daniel, who was focused on the road ahead, his hands steady on the wheel. "He's loving this trip," Sarah said, her voice filled with warmth. Daniel's lips curled into a smile. "He's a little explorer, just like his mom." Sarah laughed softly, her gaze drifting to the breathtaking view outside. Snow-dusted pine trees lined the steep cliffs, their branches swaying under the force of the wind. The sky grew darker, clouds swirling ominously as the first flakes of snow began to fall, delicate crystals dancing in the gusts. Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened as the road began to curve sharply along the edge of the mountain. The guardrails were barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. "Weather's turning faster than expected," he murmured, his eyes narrowing with concern. Sarah's smile faded as she turned her attention to the windshield, where snowflakes were rapidly multiplying, the world outside blurring into a swirl of white. "Should we head back?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. "We're closer to the cabin than to town. We'll take it slow." He leaned forward, his shoulders tense as he switched the wipers to high, their frantic rhythm the only sound breaking the uneasy silence. Noah's giggles faded, his bright eyes wide as he watched the snowflakes dance. He pointed at the window, babbling excitedly. "Snowy! Snowy!" Sarah forced a smile, her hand reaching back to touch Noah's tiny foot. "That's right, sweetheart. Snowy!" But her fingers trembled, her heart beating faster as the wind howled louder, rocking the SUV. The road grew narrower, twisting along the edge of the cliff. The snow fell thicker now, a swirling vortex that seemed to close in around them. Daniel's knuckles turned white as he guided the vehicle carefully around another bend. His eyes locked on the faint outline of the road. "Almost there," he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. A sharp crack echoed through the mountains as a tree branch snapped under the weight of the snow, crashing down behind them. Sarah jumped, her pulse racing as she glanced at Daniel, who was visibly tense. "It's okay," he assured her, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But then the tires skidded, losing traction on the icy road. The SUV lurched sideways, the world tilting as gravity pulled them toward the edge. "Hold on!" Daniel shouted, his muscles straining as he fought to regain control. Time slowed as the wheels spun helplessly, the vehicle sliding closer to the precipice. Sarah's scream was lost in the roar of the wind, her arms instinctively reaching back for Noah as the SUV broke through the flimsy guardrail. The world turned upside down, snow swirling through the shattered windows as they tumbled down the steep slope. Metal crunched and glass shattered, the SUV flipping over and over, trees whipping past in a blur of white and green. The ground rushed up to meet them, the impact jarring, stealing the breath from Sarah's lungs. Her head snapped back against the seat, pain exploding through her body before everything went black. Silence followed, broken only by the moaning wind and the faint whisper of snow settling over the wreckage. The SUV lay crumpled at the base of the cliff, its frame twisted, windows shattered, and smoke curling from the crushed hood. Inside, Daniel was slumped over the steering wheel, his face pale and blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open, pain radiating through his ribs as he struggled to breathe. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. He turned his head, his vision swimming as he saw Sarah motionless beside him, her hair tangled and face pale. Panic surged through him, adrenaline pushing him to reach for her, his fingers trembling as he touched her cheek. Her skin was cold, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Relief flooded him, but it was fleeting. A faint cry pierced the cold air. Daniel's heart dropped as he looked to the back seat. Noah's car seat was empty. The straps hung limply, the buckle shattered. Bits of glass glistened where the window had been. The snow outside marred by a trail of tiny footprints leading away from the wreckage. Fear gripped Daniel's heart, every muscle in his body screaming as he forced himself to move. Pain shot through his ribs as he crawled out of the broken window, his limbs heavy and unsteady. The snow was deep, his legs sinking as he stumbled forward, following the faint footprints that led toward the trees. "Noah!" he shouted, his voice raw and desperate, echoing through the wilderness. But there was no answer, only the howling wind and the whisper of snowflakes falling. He staggered onward, his vision blurred by tears and pain. "Noah!" His voice cracked, the cold air burning his throat. His legs buckled, sending him to his knees, the snow soaking through his clothes. "Noah," he whispered, his voice breaking as he stared at the trail of footprints disappearing into the forest. A chill ran down his spine, colder than the snow beneath him. He wasn't alone. A shadow moved among the trees, massive and silent, blending seamlessly into the winter landscape. Golden eyes gleamed in the dim light as a grizzly bear emerged from the shadows, its powerful form covered in a thick coat of fur. It moved with deliberate grace, cradling something small and fragile in its jaws. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. Noah's tiny body, limp and motionless, his curly brown hair dusted with snow. The bear's eyes met Daniel's, intelligent and watchful, its movements gentle as it turned and padded deeper into the forest. Noah held securely in its mouth. "No!" Daniel choked, his body frozen, powerless to move, as the bear's massive silhouette melted into the shadows, leaving nothing but snow and silence in its wake. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the mountain in an eerie silence as Daniel's scream echoed into the wilderness, raw and hollow, swallowed by the howling wind. He tried to push himself to his feet, his body shaking, ribs throbbing with pain, but his legs refused to cooperate. The image of the grizzly bear carrying Noah replayed in his mind, searing itself into his memory. The beast's enormous jaws cradling his son's tiny body, those piercing golden eyes staring at him before disappearing into the shadows. Desperation clawed at his chest, anger and helplessness twisting together until they formed a cry that ripped from his throat. "Noah!" His voice shattered the stillness, but no answer came, only the mournful whisper of the wind weaving through the trees. His body trembled with exhaustion and agony, but the instinct to protect his child gave him strength. He forced himself upright, his vision swimming as he staggered forward, following the faint trail of footprints in the snow, already fading beneath the fresh flakes. The pain in his ribs was sharp, each breath like knives digging into his side. But he ignored it, his focus locked on the trees that had swallowed his son. "Noah!" he shouted again, his voice breaking as he stumbled through the snow, branches clawing at his face and clothes. His feet sank into the deep drifts, his body sluggish and weak, but he refused to stop, his heart pounding wildly, urging him forward. Each step felt like a battle, but he pushed on, the trees closing in around him, their shadows stretching long and ominous across the ground. He followed the bear's tracks, massive paw prints pressed into the snow alongside the faint marks of Noah's tiny boots. Daniel's mind raced, memories flashing before his eyes. Noah's laughter filling their home, his little hands reaching up for a hug, the way his eyes sparkled when he discovered something new. The thought of those eyes dimming, that laughter's silence, twisted Daniel's stomach, his chest tightening with fear. He wouldn't let it happen. He couldn't. He would find Noah, no matter what it took. But the tracks grew faint, snow falling faster, covering the trail. The forest was a labyrinth of white, every tree and shadow blending together, and Daniel's head spun, disoriented by the cold and pain. His knees buckled, sending him crashing into the snow, his body shivering violently as the wind howled around him. "Noah," he whispered, his voice cracking, his vision blurring as tears froze against his skin. He tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out, his body sinking into the snow's icy embrace. Darkness crept at the edges of his vision, his strength slipping away. He felt the cold seep into his bones, his eyelids heavy, the world fading. A voice called out, distant and faint, cutting through the roar of the storm. "Daniel!" He thought it was a hallucination, his mind playing cruel tricks as the cold pulled him under. But then he heard it again, louder, more urgent. "Daniel!" Strong hands gripped his shoulders, shaking him roughly. He blinked, his eyes struggling to focus, as a familiar face swam into view. Jack Dawson, his friend and an experienced tracker, his rugged face etched with worry, dusting his dark hair and thick coat. "Daniel, stay with me." Jack's voice was firm, commanding, dragging Daniel back from the brink. "Noah," Daniel croaked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The bear. It took him. It took my son." His words were broken, choked by sobs that shuddered through his body. Jack's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he glanced toward the dense forest. "A bear? Are you sure?" Daniel nodded weakly, his head spinning as he remembered the golden eyes, the enormous shape moving through the snow. It had him in its mouth." His voice cracked, the pain in his chest doubling as he relived the moment. Jack's face hardened, his gaze sharpening with purpose. "We need to get you back to the crash. Sarah's hurt. The rescue team's on their way." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the forest. "I'll find him, Daniel. I promise." But Daniel shook his head violently, his fingers curling into Jack's coat. "No, I have to find him. He's out there. He's alone." Jack's expression softened, his grip on Daniel's shoulders tightening. "You're in no shape to keep going. You'll die out here. You need to get warm, get patched up. Then we'll go after him together. I swear, Daniel, we'll bring him back." The promise broke through Daniel's haze of pain and exhaustion, giving him the strength to nod, even as his heart screamed at him to keep moving. Jack wrapped an arm around him, half carrying him back toward the wreckage, their boots crunching through the snow. Daniel's body felt heavy, his legs dragging as his vision swam, his mind clouded with fear and helplessness. The scene at the crash site was chaotic, flashing lights painting the snow in red and blue, voices shouting orders, medics swarming around Sarah as she lay on a stretcher, her face pale and eyes dazed. Daniel's heart twisted, guilt crashing over him. He had left her, chased after Noah while she was hurt and alone, but her eyes found his, relief flooding her face as she whispered, "Noah, is he?" Her voice wavered, her fingers reaching for his. Daniel's throat tightened, his voice breaking. He's out there. The bear. It took him." Sarah's eyes widened, horror freezing her features as tears spilled down her cheeks. No, not my baby. Not Noah." Her voice shattered, the pain and fear tearing through Daniel like knives. He wanted to comfort her, to promise her that everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. He had seen the bear, seen Noah's limp body in its jaws. The image haunted him, burned into his mind, and all he could do was sink to his knees beside her, his body shaking with sobs. Jack's voice cut through the chaos, firm and steady as he spoke to the search team. "We've got a child taken by a grizzly, male about 2 years old, last seen heading north into the woods. We need trackers, dogs, and tranquilizers. This is a rescue, not a hunt." His words were met with grim nods, urgency rippling through the team as they prepared to go after the bear. Daniel's head snapped up, hope flaring in his chest. Jack caught his eye, his expression fierce and unyielding. "We're going to find him, Daniel. We'll bring Noah home." The words were a lifeline, a spark of hope amidst the darkness, and Daniel clung to them, his heart pounding with renewed determination. As the snow continued to fall, the search began, the lights disappearing into the shadows of the forest. The forest was vast and ancient, stretching endlessly beneath the heavy, snow-laden sky. Towering pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches bowed under the weight of white. The wind whispered through the needles, carrying with it the scent of ice and earth. In the heart of this wilderness, the grizzly moved with fluid grace, its powerful body weaving through the dense undergrowth. Muscles rippled beneath its thick fur, each step sure and deliberate, leaving deep paw prints in the snow. Its golden eyes were sharp, reflecting intelligence and purpose as it carried the tiny bundle in its massive jaws. Noah hung limply, his small body swaddled in his puffy winter jacket, his curly brown hair dusted with snowflakes. His face was peaceful, his eyes closed, lips parted slightly as he slept, oblivious to the cold and the danger. The bear's grip was gentle, its teeth cradling the child with a tenderness that seemed impossible for a creature of its size and strength. It moved swiftly but cautiously, its ears swiveling to catch every sound, nostrils flaring to read the scents on the wind. It knew this forest well. Every tree, every shadow was familiar, its territory marked and protected for years. The den was hidden beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient cedar, concealed by fallen branches and layers of snow. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary carved out by claws and time. The grizzly lowered its head as it approached, its shoulders brushing against the narrow entrance. The air inside was warmer, heavy with the earthy scent of moss and soil. The bear moved with practiced ease, curling its massive body to shield the sleeping child from the cold draft that whispered through the cracks. It placed Noah gently on a bed of dried leaves and pine needles, nosing him softly to ensure he was warm. A low rumbling sound filled the den as the bear settled around him, its breath a steady rhythm that echoed off the walls. The child stirred, his eyelids fluttering as his tiny fingers twitched, reaching instinctively for warmth. His hand brushed against thick fur, his body curling closer without fear or hesitation. The grizzly's golden eyes softened, watching him with a curiosity that bordered on affection. Outside, the storm raged on, snow swirling through the forest, erasing the trail that led to the den. The world was a blur of white and shadow, the howling wind drowning out all other sounds. But inside the den, it was quiet, the air warm and still, the heartbeat of the great bear a lullaby that soothed the child back to sleep. Hours passed, the storm gradually losing its fury, the wind's roar fading to a whisper. The bear's eyes never closed, its body a protective wall around the fragile creature that had stumbled into its world. It watched the rise and fall of the child's chest, the delicate flutter of his eyelashes, the soft murmur of his breath. It was not the first time the grizzly had cared for the young and helpless. Long ago, in another winter, she had cradled her own cubs in this den, guarded them fiercely against the cold and the predators that lurked in the shadows. But that was before the sickness took them, before their tiny bodies grew still and cold against her warmth. She had stayed with them for days, nuzzling them, trying to wake them, refusing to believe they were gone. Her grief had been a heavy weight, a hollow ache that echoed in her chest long after she had buried them beneath the snow. She had been alone ever since, her territory empty, her days a monotonous cycle of hunting and roaming, searching for something she could never find. Until she heard the cries, faint and trembling, carried on the wind. At first she had thought it was a cub, lost and afraid, calling for its mother. Her heart had leaped, a primal instinct driving her to follow the sound. But when she reached the clearing, she found the wreckage, twisted metal and shattered glass strewn across the snow. The scent of blood and fear hung heavy in the air, but it was the tiny voice that held her still, her ears straining to catch the whimpering sound. She had found him lying half buried in the snow, his face streaked with tears, his arms reaching out as if searching for someone. He had looked so small, so helpless, his cries weak and broken. Something stirred within her, a memory of her own cubs, their soft whines and warm bodies curled against her. Her tightened, and before she could question the impulse, she had gently lifted him in her jaws, careful not to hurt him. He had quieted then, his body relaxing against her, his head resting trustingly on her paw as she carried him away from the wreckage, away from the cold and pain. In the den, Noah began to stir, his fingers curling into the bear's fur, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment he looked confused, his tiny face scrunching as he tried to understand where he was. But then his gaze settled on the golden eyes watching him, calm and steady, reflecting the flickering light that seeped through the cracks in the den. His fear melted away, replaced by curiosity. He reached out, his fingers brushing the soft fur, his lips curving into a smile. "Bear," he whispered, his voice small and drowsy, his breath warm against her nose. The grizzly rumbled softly, a low vibration that resonated deep in her chest, a sound of reassurance. Noah giggled, his fingers tangling in the fur as he nestled closer, his body relaxing as if he had always belonged there. The bear's heart swelled, an ancient instinct rising within her, a fierce protectiveness that had lain dormant since the loss of her cubs. She lowered her head, her nose brushing his forehead in a gesture of comfort, her eyes softening as she watched him drift back to sleep. Outside, the storm finally broke, the clouds parting to reveal a pale dawn, the light spreading slowly across the snow-covered forest. But the world inside the den remained unchanged, warm and safe, a cocoon of earth and fur where the child slept cradled in the arms of the beast. The grizzly closed her eyes, her body curling protectively around him, her heart beating steadily beneath his cheek. For the first time in years, the ache in her chest eased, the hollow emptiness filled by the tiny life that now depended on her. She would guard him, shelter him, keep him safe from the dangers lurking in the shadows. He was hers now, her cub, her responsibility, and she would protect him with everything she had. The snow gleamed under the pale morning light, a pristine blanket stretching endlessly over the rugged landscape. Tall pines stood like silent guardians, their branches heavy with frost. The forest was still, holding its breath as if aware of the tragedy that had unfolded within its depths. At the crash site, chaos buzzed like static in the air, a jarring contrast to the serene wilderness. Rescue vehicles were scattered along the roadside, lights flashing red and blue, their beams cutting through the lingering haze. Paramedics worked swiftly, their movements precise as they loaded Sarah onto a stretcher, her face pale, lips tinged with blue, but her eyes open, searching desperately. "Noah," she whispered, her voice fragile, breaking on the name. Her fingers curled weakly around Daniel's hand, her nails biting into his skin. He could barely feel it, numbness spreading from his chest, cold and hollow. He sat beside her, knees sinking into the snow, his body stiff, face blank as her words echoed through his mind. Noah? Where is he? She already knew. She had seen the look in his eyes, the raw agony that told her more than words ever could. But she needed to hear it, needed him to say it out loud, to break the fragile hope clinging to her heart. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came. His throat was tight, breath shallow, the air frigid as it clawed at his lungs. Images flickered before his eyes, replaying in relentless loops. The shattered window, the empty car seat, the footprints leading away from the wreckage, and the bear, its massive form disappearing into the forest. Noah cradled gently in its jaws. A sob choked him, sharp and violent, tearing through his chest. He felt Sarah's grip loosen, her body trembling as her face crumpled, the truth crashing down like ice water. Her head fell back against the stretcher, eyes squeezed shut, tears freezing on her cheeks. "No, no, not my baby." Her voice was a broken whisper, raw and aching, a sound that would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. He reached for her, his hands trembling as he tried to hold her, to keep her from shattering. But she pulled away, curling in on herself, her body racked with silent sobs. "Why did you leave him?" Her words cut deep, sharper than any blade. Daniel's breath hitched, his heart seizing painfully. I tried." His voice was hollow, empty, the guilt searing through him. He had chased after Noah, had followed the footprints, but he hadn't been fast enough, strong enough. He had failed, and now his son was gone, lost somewhere in the endless expanse of snow and trees. A hand fell on his shoulder, firm and steady. He looked up, vision blurred, and saw Jack standing over him, his expression grim, eyes dark with determination. "We're going to find him, Daniel, I swear it." No hesitation, no doubt in Jack's voice, just the solid certainty of a man who had spent his life navigating these mountains, who knew the forest like the back of his hand. Daniel wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to that spark of hope, but all he could see was the bear's golden eyes, the way it had looked at him before vanishing into the shadows. It hadn't been vicious, hadn't shown aggression or hunger. It had simply watched him, calm and intelligent, then turned and walked away, carrying Noah as carefully as if he were its own cub. The memory sent a chill down Daniel's spine, fear twisting in his gut. What kind of animal did that? What kind of creature took a child and disappeared without a sound? Jack's grip tightened, his voice lowering, steady and commanding. I need you to focus. Tell me exactly what you saw. Every detail. Daniel's mouth was dry, his tongue heavy as he forced himself to speak, his voice cracking with each word. It was huge. A grizzly, I think. It had him in its mouth, but it wasn't hurting him. It was gentle. The last word tasted bitter, absurd. How could a creature so powerful, so dangerous, be gentle? But that was the truth. The image seared into his mind. The bear's massive jaws cradling Noah with a tenderness that defied nature. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information, his mind working rapidly. A grizzly, and it didn't attack you? Didn't act aggressive? Daniel shook his head, his chest tight. No, it just looked at me, almost like it understood. The words sounded ridiculous, impossible, but Jack didn't laugh, didn't doubt. He simply nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. Then it's not a hunt, it's a rescue. He turned sharply, his voice barking out orders to the assembled team. I need trackers on those footprints now. Follow the bear's trail. It's moving north, heading for higher ground. We need dogs, tranquilizers, and a chopper in the air. That child is alive, and we're bringing him home. The search team sprang into action, their movements swift and coordinated, honed by years of experience in the harsh wilderness. Radios crackled as orders were relayed, dogs barking eagerly as they were led to the footprints, noses twitching as they caught the scent. Jack knelt beside the tracks, his fingers brushing the snow, his eyes sharp and focused. The bear's moving fast, but it's not running. No signs of panic. It knows exactly where it's going. He looked up at Daniel, his gaze fierce. That's good news. It means Noah's safe for now. The relief was almost crippling, Daniel's legs giving out as he sank into the snow, his body trembling. But the fear was still there, gnawing at his heart, a constant reminder that his son was out there, alone in the wilderness, cradled in the jaws of a predator. Jack's voice cut through his panic, firm and steady. Get to the hospital with Sarah. I'll keep you updated. I need you strong for when we find him. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, to protest that he wasn't leaving without his son. But Jack's grip was unyielding, his expression unwavering. You need to be ready for him, Daniel. He's going to need you. The words hit home, breaking through the haze of fear and guilt. Daniel looked at Sarah, saw the shattered look in her eyes, the way she was curled on the stretcher, arms wrapped protectively around herself. She needed him too. They had to be strong, together for Noah. He nodded, his voice hoarse. Bring him back, Jack. Please, bring my son home. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with determination. I will, I promise. As Daniel watched the search team disappear into the forest, their figures swallowed by the shadows, he clung to that promise, praying that it would be enough. The snow continued to fall, silent and unrelenting, covering the footprints, erasing the trail. But somewhere in the depths of the wilderness, his son was alive, held in the arms of the beast, and Daniel would do whatever it took to bring him back. The forest was a world of whitened shadow, ancient trees standing tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of pine and frost. Soft flakes drifted down, swirling lazily before settling onto the thick blanket that covered the ground. Beneath the gnarled roots of a towering cedar, hidden from the icy wind, the grizzly watched over the tiny child who slept curled against her warm belly. His soft breasts formed little clouds in the cold air, his fingers tangled in her thick fur. The bear's golden eyes were half-lidded, her body relaxed yet vigilant, ears swiveling at the faintest sound. The den was dim, the light filtering through cracks in the earthen walls, casting delicate shadows that danced across the rough interior. The ground was padded with dried leaves and moss, a nest carefully constructed to keep the chill at bay. Safe, secluded, a sanctuary far from the dangers lurking in the vast wilderness. The child stirred, his little face scrunching as his eyes fluttered open. Confusion flickered across his delicate features as he looked around, his surroundings unfamiliar, the air filled with the scent of earth and fur. But then he looked up, his gaze meeting the golden eyes watching him, calm and gentle, glowing softly in the dim light. "Bear," he whispered, his voice small, innocent, his lips curving into a smile. His fingers tightened in the warm fur, his body instinctively curling closer, seeking warmth and safety. The grizzly rumbled softly, a low vibration that resonated deep within her chest, a sound of reassurance. The child giggled, the sweet sound echoing off the walls, filling the den with a warmth that chased away the lingering shadows. He reached up, his tiny fingers brushing the bear's nose, his touch feather-light, curious and unafraid. The grizzly remained perfectly still, her breath a steady rhythm as she watched him explore, her heart tightening with an emotion she hadn't felt in years. His scent was different from any creature she had ever known, a mixture of snow and salt, sweetness and innocence. It was foreign yet familiar, awakening a primal instinct buried deep within her, the echo of a bond that transcended species and time. Memories drifted through her mind, unbidden and bittersweet. The soft cries of her own cubs, the warmth of their tiny bodies pressed against her belly, the way they had tangled themselves in her fur. Just like this. But they were gone, lost to a sickness she could not heal, their small forms cold and still, their bright eyes dimmed forever. She had carried them from the den, her heart breaking with every step, bearing them beneath the snow, howling her grief into the silent night. She had been alone ever since, wandering the forest, her territory empty, her days filled with solitude and sorrow. But this child, this strange, fragile creature with its tiny hands and bright eyes, he had awakened something within her, something she thought had died with her cubs. The need to protect, to nurture, to love. She lowered her head, her nose brushing his cheek, breathing in his scent, memorizing the shape of him, the warmth of his skin. He laughed softly, his fingers patting her snout, his voice a melodic whisper. Soft bear, warm bear. The words meant nothing to her, but the tone was soothing, gentle, a lullaby that eased the ache in her heart. She rumbled again, a deep purr that vibrated through her body, enveloping the child in warmth and safety. Outside the den, the wind howled, snow swirling through the trees, masking the scent and sound of all who moved beneath the canopy. The forest was vast, wild, a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, but the grizzly knew every inch of it, every trail and hidden path. She had chosen this den for its seclusion, its safety, hidden away from predators and danger. But danger had a way of finding even the most protected places. Far off in the distance, carried on the cold wind, came the faint echo of voices, sharp and urgent, the crackle of radios and the barking of dogs. The bear's head snapped up, her ears pricking as she listened, muscles tensing beneath her fur. Humans. The scent reached her next, foreign and bitter, laced with metal and fear. Her lips curled instinctively, a low growl rumbling deep in her chest, vibrating through the ground. The child looked up, his blue eyes wide, sensing the change in her. He whimpered, his tiny body pressing closer, his fingers tightening in her fur. The bear's eyes softened, her growl fading as she nuzzled him gently, a silent promise that she would protect him, no matter the cost. The voices grew louder, closer, echoing through the trees. The bear rose slowly, careful not to jostle the child, her massive form blocking the entrance to the den, her body a wall of muscle and fur. Her golden eyes gleamed in the shadows, fierce and unyielding, her ears swiveling as she tracked the movements outside. She recognized the scent. Men hunters who had stalked her kind for generations, bringing pain and death. Her claws flexed, carving deep grooves into the earth, her muscles coiled, ready to defend. But she would not fight, not unless she had to. She had no desire for violence, no hunger for blood. Her only instinct was to protect the small life curled beneath her, the fragile creature who had captured her heart. She turned her head, nosing the child softly, urging him to stay still, to be silent. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust, unafraid, his lips forming a soft whisper. Bear. Safe. The grizzly's heart twisted, her resolve hardening as she positioned herself between him and the danger outside. The shadows shifted, the scent growing stronger, footsteps crunching through the snow. A figure moved through the trees, tall and broad, his coat dusted with frost, a rifle slung across his back. His face was hard, eyes sharp and searching, his stance cautious. The bear's eyes narrowed, her muscles bunching, ready to spring. But the man did not draw his weapon. He crouched, his gloved fingers brushing the snow as he examined the tracks leading to the den. His voice was low, reverent, filled with awe. Noah, you're alive. Oh God, please let him be alive. The grizzly's head tilted, curiosity flickering in her eyes. The man's scent was different. There was no malice, no fear, only pain and longing. He rose slowly, his gaze fixed on the den's entrance, his shoulders slumping as he whispered, "Please, I just want my son back." The bear's heart softened, confusion rippling through her. This man was not like the others, not like the hunters who brought death. He was something else, something important, but she could not risk it. Not yet, not while the child was so vulnerable. She stepped back, her body disappearing into the shadows, her golden eyes gleaming as she watched the man turn away, his shoulders heavy with sorrow. The bear lowered herself protectively over the child, her heart aching as she listened to his soft breathing, felt the warmth of his tiny body. She would not let them take him, not yet, not until she was sure. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the forest wrapped in a shimmering blanket of white. The sky above was pale, streaked with soft hues of pink and gold as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. A hush had settled over the world, the air crisp and still, broken only by the faint rustle of branches and the distant echo of footsteps crunching through the snow. The grizzly watched from the shadows, her golden eyes fixed on the figures moving through the trees. They were getting closer, their scent strong and distinct. Men, dogs, machines, and something more. Grief, desperation, fear. She could feel it radiating from them, a heavy weight that made the air seem colder, the world smaller. Her muscles tensed, her body coiled and ready, but she did not move. The child lay curled against her belly, his tiny fingers tangled in her fur, his face peaceful, cheeks flushed with warmth. She watched him sleep, her heart twisting with a tenderness that defied reason. He was fragile, defenseless, so different from her own kind, yet he felt like hers. A cub, small and precious, needing her protection. The voices grew louder, echoing through the trees, each word a sharp note cutting through the silence. She understood nothing of their language, but she could hear the pain, the fear, the urgency. They were searching for something. No, someone. Her eyes flicked to the child, her instincts flaring, a deep growl rumbling in her chest. They were coming for him. Her body tensed, muscles rippling beneath her thick fur, her heart racing as she considered the danger. They would try to take him, would try to separate them, and she couldn't let that happen. He was hers, her cub, her responsibility. She stood, her massive form casting a shadow over the boy, her eyes locked on the den's entrance. But as she prepared to defend, the child stirred, his fingers flexing, his lips parting in a soft whisper. "Mama." The word was faint, a breath of sound, but it was filled with so much longing, so much need, that the grizzly froze, her growl fading, confusion rippling through her. He wasn't calling to her, he was calling to them. Her heart twisted painfully, an ache that spread through her chest, tightening around her ribs. She looked down at him, saw the tear slipping down his cheek, his tiny body curling in on itself as he whimpered again. "Mama?" It was a plea, a cry of loneliness and loss, and it shattered something inside her. She lowered her head, her nose brushing his cheek, her golden eyes softening. He didn't belong to her. He never had. He belonged to them, to the people who were searching, to the voices filled with fear and love and grief. She closed her eyes, pain swelling within her. fierce and hollow, but she knew what she had to do. She nuzzled him gently, a soft rumble vibrating through her chest, waking him slowly. His eyes fluttered open, sleepy and confused, his fingers tightening in her fur as he looked up at her. "Bear," he whispered, his voice small, his eyes wide and trusting. She licked his face, her tongue rough but gentle, a farewell etched in instinct. He giggled, his fear melting, his fingers reaching up to touch her nose. "Bear, my bear." His voice was warm, affectionate, and it broke her heart. She wanted to keep him, to protect him, to love him, but she knew she could not. They were getting closer. She could hear them now, the voices trembling, urgent, desperate. "Noah, please, Noah!" The child's head turned, his eyes widening, recognition sparking in his gaze. He sat up, his small body wobbling, his lips parting. "Mama! Dada!" His voice was louder, hope coloring every syllable, his body quivering with anticipation. Back at the bear, his eyes searching hers, his expression torn. "Bear, come!" Her heart ached, the pain sharp and searing, but she shook her head, her golden eyes gentle, filled with a love he could never understand. She nudged him softly, urging him to his feet, pushing him toward the light at the mouth of the den. He stumbled, his legs unsteady, but he obeyed, his small hands gripping the rough walls as he climbed out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Mama! Dada!" The forest exploded with sound, shouts of joy, cries of relief, the rush of footsteps, and the thud of bodies falling to their knees in the snow. The grizzly watched from the shadows, her massive form hidden by the darkness, her golden eyes reflecting the light as she saw him fall into his parents' arms, his tiny body engulfed by warmth and love. The man wept, his shoulders shaking as he held his son, his fingers clutching him tightly, his voice broken with sobs. "Noah, my boy, my precious boy." The woman's cries were softer, her face buried in his hair, her hands trembling as she touched his cheeks, his arms, his tiny fingers. "Oh God, oh thank you, my baby." The bear felt her heart fracture, felt the pain radiate through her, heavy and hollow, but she did not move. She watched them, her body still, silent, invisible, a shadow lingering at the edge of light. The child turned, his bright blue eyes scanning the trees, his face hopeful. "Bear?" He reached out, his fingers brushing the empty air, his lips trembling. "Bear? Where are you?" The man looked up, his eyes wide, his voice shaky. Did you see something? Did someone help you?" The boy shook his head, his curls bouncing, his eyes searching. "Not someone. Bear, my bear." He looked back at the shadows, his voice cracking. "Come back, please. Don't leave me." The bear's chest tightened, a low whine escaping her lips, but she did not move. She watched him cry, watched his parents hold him, whispering words of love and comfort, wrapping him in warmth and safety. He was where he belonged, with his family, with his kind. He would be safe now, loved, protected. She backed away, her massive paws silent on the snow, her golden eyes never leaving his face until she was swallowed by the shadows, her form blending seamlessly into the forest. Her heart ached, her body heavy, but she did not look back. She could still hear his voice, soft and pleading, echoing through the trees. "Bear, please, and come back." But she would not. She could not. Her place was here, in the wilderness, alone. It was where she belonged. The shadows closed around her, the forest growing quiet once more, the snow falling softly as the light faded. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the wilderness, the bear lifted her head, golden eyes glistening, and roared her grief into the silent night. This story beautifully illustrates the power of love and the unbreakable bonds that transcend even the boundaries of nature. It reminds us that compassion and protection are instincts shared by all creatures, no matter how different we may seem. The bear's selfless act of caring for the lost child teaches us about sacrifice, courage, and the purity of unconditional love. It also shows us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the willingness to protect and nurture. As humans, we can learn from this example to cherish our loved ones and show kindness even in the most unexpected circumstances. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment about what moved you the most. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories that inspire and remind us of the beauty in the world. Until next time, take care and remember, love knows no boundaries.